Welcome to the Answer is Yes podcast, where we interview some of the most interesting people that have said yes to opportunities in their life. We hope that through these stories, you can learn to create your own destiny by saying yes along the way. Join us as we explore the new series covering topics such as passion, integrity, and hard work. I'm your host, Jim Riley, and I hope you enjoy these interviews as much as I do. I believe that everyone has an important message worth hearing. Hello and welcome to The Answer is Yes. We're all holed up in our homes, making the most of it, I hope. You're looking at opportunities in this new environment that we're all living in. And I always want to bring value to you on what you're doing, and now is a special time in our lives to figure all that out. So I've brought on a special guest today. His name is Yoko. How are you today, Chris?
I'm doing well, Jim. How about yourself?
Hanging in there, looking for all the opportunities every single day. lot going on in the cyber world.
It's a lot of opportunity, amidst a lot of noise. So it's something to suss it out.
Yeah, when I was doing some research on you, your publicist sent me over your one sheet and asked if we'd be willing to have you on the show, which they're doing a great job, by the way. The first line, or at least the first long sentence in your bio, it says, driven by an infatigable determination to make the world a better place, and you're focused on helping people. I didn't have to read any more than that because I was instantly attracted to what your message was. Can you tell me what that means real fast, and then I want to dig into your history?
Yeah, I think the world as we know it, is kind of driven on progress. And what we started to see was a lot of kind of bifurcation in that, where some people are like, all right, we've made it far enough. We don't have to push as hard. We've got things pretty good. And I sure as hell don't want to be the generation to say like, all right, that was, humanity's high watermark. I want to make sure we continue to push things forward. And then a lot of that nuance is how you define good, right? Like people have done terrible things in the name of what they thought was good. And so in that realm, we really believe in things that create more opportunity and equality of opportunity across the globe, sustainability, compassion, and are really able to drive those things, especially with transformative technology.
So you are a founder of a marketing company, correct? Is that Yoko Co?
Yep. Yoko Co, Yoko CO. We get called all kinds of things, but I think the fun one is the one with the alliteration.
Well, I want to hear all about that, but can you maybe dig back into your background and tell us, where being an entrepreneur started for you, or some of your early career paths where you said yes along the way to ultimately having your own company?
Yeah. How far back do you want to go? Do you want to go back to like first hustles, like, elementary school, or, more recent things? Where would you like to begin?
We love first hustles. And one of the things that I've discovered is most entrepreneurs on the show have either had a paper route, a lemonade stand, popcorn stand, the list goes on, but usually at a very young age. So you start where it started becoming relevant for you, because we'd like to hear about it.
Yeah, fall in line pretty much with all the others you mentioned. My first hustle was back in the day, you could get those little neon pixie sticks, the little short ones. I think they were like 4 inches long, and you could get 100 of them for $1 at the dollar store. And so I'd grab I'd wrangle together $1, and I'd put them in my backpack. And I think it was like second, third grade. I would sell them to my classmates for $0.05 a pop, and you get $1 to go back and buy some more, and then you made $4 profit yourself. And that was the first time where I realized I was like, there's something to this.
I love first hustles.
Yeah, maybe not quite as aligned with, making the world a better place, but definitely making the world a sugary, more active place.
Yeah, sure. So obviously you made it through your scholastic years. Did you go on to college and study in marketing, or did you have a different career path at the time? So I, in high school, I read the book. Have you heard of Rich Dad, Poor Dad? We sure have.
Robert Kiyosaki?
Yes.
Okay. So I got that as a gift my senior year of high school, and I read it in, I think, like a day and a half. And I knew that I was going to be paying my own way through school. My parents had taken out student loans, both of them. They hated them, complained about them incessantly until they were paid off, and even then still. So I knew that I had to pay my way through school. And as I read that book, I was like, oh, real estate, like that's the way to do it. Like, of course, I'm going to be a real estate investor. Of course, to be a real estate investor, it helps to either have a working knowledge of the market or some capital, and I had neither. But what I did end up doing is I got my real estate license before I moved away to go to college. And I went to college a few hundred miles away from home and signed on with a broker there locally. And they said, great, like now you're an agent, go sell homes to your friends and family. And that was like all the further onboarding we got. And I was like, well, my friends and I have $8.50, which we were going to use at CVS to buy light beer. So they're not buying a home. And my family's, hundreds of miles away.
Yeah, sure.
But what had set me on the path was I had all through middle and high school played around with coding up websites and just really enjoyed that. So I had coded up a website that basically branded me as an expert for out-of-town investors. I went to school in the DC area. And so I had basically said, hey, if you want to invest in this area, it's a really good property market. This is the team that can help you out. And I just didn't have to tell anyone that the team was more of the royal we. And through that, I got really lucky. I met a couple of investors outside of Pittsburgh and Philadelphia who ultimately ended up investing in a couple properties. And a market like DC, you don't have to sell a whole lot to be able to afford to pay for college and stuff. So I was able to eke through college doing that and got a taste of kind of running my own business while working through college. And then right afterwards, I'd broken my leg in a car accident or in a hockey game, and then I had a car accident within about 2 weeks of each other. And I realized I really enjoyed a lot of aspects of running a business, but I didn't really enjoy working with other realtors. A lot of them, it was a hobby, and I wanted to do something that was a little bit more driven.
Sure. So what set you on this path of marketing and really becoming more of a marketer versus some of the other things?
Yeah, so the first taste was, doing the websites and stuff for the real estate business, and that was how I attracted those clients. So I started to see something where I'm like, oh, I can code and use some of my creative energy to create this thing that enables me to have these business conversations with people I'd otherwise had never met. And so I realized there was definitely some power there, and I wasn't sure how to harness it except for that application in real estate. But after my stints in real estate, I ended up working with CBS Radio, mostly again in the DC area. And it was a time when Facebook, Twitter, podcasting, like all these things were starting to rise into the social conscious, and they had no idea how to use them. It was a pretty analog medium in terms of just, all right, we record a show, we put spots in between, show segments, and that's the business model. And so they're trying to figure out how do we work with all of these other types of media that are coming into play? How do we derive revenue from them? And so I got to have a pretty cool spot where I was partially in like the technical creative side of the business where I got to help create products. I got to help us create our podcast streams. I got to help us create some of our first live stream opportunities, Facebook pages, Twitter accounts, like all of that stuff that allowed the shows to be more accessible and interactive, especially with a lot of like the talk shows. Mm-hmm. So got a chance to do a lot of the back and forth communication there. And it was just really enlightening, eye-opening work. And so that was where I really started to kind of see the passion of being able to connect with an audience that you would have otherwise never known through some of these vehicles that we can use online. And that was ultimately what ended up fueling the passion and the reason I started the business that I run today.
So when you start working with a new client, it's interesting when we start dissecting marketing, and there's so many philosophies that are similar, but yet people miss it so badly. One of the things I think we all have to consider, not only when we look at ourselves as our self-awareness, but also when you look at a company, is the company culture and what your messaging is. And oftentimes I find that people just miss their own company culture description altogether. How do you work people through that discovery process as you start to bring them into this digital world and bring them out into the, whether it be their websites or their social media aspects?
Yeah, I think you're right. And I the closest I've come to putting my thumb on it, and there's probably a ton of reasons this happens, but one of the ones I think is most popular, especially early in businesses, is kind of this like FOMO, like this fear of missing out on other opportunities, that if you give language that brands you too boldly in one direction, you might miss out on opportunities to go in another direction. Or if you appeal too much to one audience, you could miss out on business from another audience. And so people have these kind of like watered down, like I want to be everything to everyone kind of brands. And that's, certainly not what you see in the upper echelon of like really well branded organizations, until they become so ubiquitous that like Amazon can be everything to everyone. But as you're going through those growth stages, it's the niche audience that enables you to be really well. And I think to the point of your question, is it driving that alignment? And so a big part of the conversation we have with clients, especially really early, and this works internally and externally, is where is their alignment and passion for the thing that you do? People that work on your team are going to feel a lot more passionate about the work that they do if they feel aligned with it. They feel like they're making an impact and they can see how they make an impact. And it's the same thing with an audience. If you're working towards your customers, they want to see how their buying decision plays into that kind of bigger picture impact that you're, basically aiming to make. And what kind of steps do you go through to make that happen? How do you illustrate that to them? And how do you get, usually like a board or, a committee to agree to be polarizing? Because that also means, turning away from a fair amount of an audience. And it's usually one you weren't super excited about anyway, but that FOMO, really breathes strong. So if you can kind of get people past that and get them to realize like, you'll be strongest whenever all the fibers are running in the same direction and they're all supporting the weight the right way. That's where alignment comes in. And I think that's where a lot of brands miss the mark, large or small.
Yeah. I think this is such an important conversation as it relates to brands. That FOMO and that I want it now scenario, people shift gears too often and forget about who they really are and what their company culture is. It's interesting. We live in a world where we're so exposed to successes, and I came from the alcohol industry with Kettle One Vodka, and my friends work over at Tito's Vodka, and you think, man,
oh, perfect, yeah,
those brands are so big and beautiful. Like Tito's was nowhere, now all of a sudden it's the biggest vodka company in the world. But what people don't realize is that Tito spent 18 years perfecting that. Nobody even knew who he was for the first 12 to 13 of them. Then all of a sudden he started getting a little traction. And the key with Tito, and the same goes for Kettle One and all the years that I worked there and their worldwide success, is that the messaging was consistent for so long, and the patience of the owners to allow that message to resonate over years worth of time is what created that special brand. How do you teach brands today, Chris, to have the patience and resilience to stay focused on what their company culture and responsibility is?
Other than stories, I haven't found a successful way. And Jim, if you have them, I'd love to hear yours. A lot of it depends. The things that I've seen work successfully is obviously I can share my experience and I can share the experience of brands we've led through that journey. And a lot of times that comes back to the stories. And so before we had like stories of people who'd been on that journey before that we could use, it really went back to the impact. Mm-hmm. So we'd start with that kind of seed, like, if this thing, if you got hit by a bus tomorrow, what would you want the company you were with or that you founded or that you worked for 30 years or whatever the case might be? What would you want that to say about, the legacy of your life and what kind of impact you've left behind? Mm-hmm. And when you start to craft around that kind of impact and the tangible change you want to have on the world, people tend to have a little bit more patience. If they're direct owners or direct boards, like private equity firms and stuff, I don't know that you have a lot of success with this tact with them. Some of the other tacts will work a little better. But being able to have that conversation and then showing those stories of, like you said, it's every brand you think of as an overnight success because you heard about them and then suddenly they were huge. It took a decade, 5 years, 10 years, 8 years. Like it took years and years and years for them to put down the roots and the infrastructure and just the hustle and work to build an audience that cared enough about them and supported them passionately enough that they could get to that place where now all of a sudden they seem like an overnight success.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, it's, showing that journey kind of over and over again, where you've got these brands that, kind of chase every single opportunity. And it works for people too, right? I mean, it works for a personal brand or, a business or organizational brand is you get distracted. We call it shiny object syndrome. You see like, oh, this is cool. And, oh, we should be using this technology. And, oh, we should do this thing. And, oh, now we've got AI. And, oh, we should be doing VR. And, oh, what about AG? Oh, what about, we should be